"You're broke!" my daughter shouted, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at me accusingly across the dining table that I'd sacrificed so much to buy. The expensive wine in her glass sloshed dangerously close to the edge as she gestured wildly. Her husband, Richard, smirked beside her, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been punched. The remnants of our Sunday dinner, a meal I'd spent all day preparing, sat forgotten between us. "Margaret, be reasonable," Richard said, though his patronizing tone made it clear he was anything but on my side. "The market crashed. Your investments are worthless. The medical bills from Dad's cancer treatment cleaned out whatever was left." He adjusted his designer watch, a gift from me last Christmas. "We're just trying to help you face reality." I stared at my daughter, searching for any trace of the little girl who once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. Instead, I found only cold calculation in eyes that matched her father's, my late husband, Thomas. The resemblance had once brought me comfort. Now it felt like a curse. "The house has to go, Mom," Jennifer said, her voice softening slightly, though the steel beneath remained. "You can't afford the property taxes, let alone the upkeep. It's too big for one person anyway. Conveniently, we have a solution," Richard added, pulling a folder from his leather briefcase. He slid it across the table toward me. "The guest house behind our property. It's small but comfortable. You'd be close to us and Aiden." The mention of my 7-year-old grandson was deliberate, a chess move I recognized immediately. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were papers for the sale of my home, the colonial on Maple Street where I'd lived for 40 years, and a quitclaim deed for a tiny guest cottage. The price they'd set for my house was insulting, barely half its value in this historic Charleston neighborhood. "We've already spoken with a realtor," Jennifer continued, checking her diamond-studded watch. "She can list it next week. The market's hot right now, and your medical insurance is almost maxed out," Richard added. "After Thomas's treatments." My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it, too stunned to move. The grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from Thomas's parents, chimed 7 times, marking another hour in a day that had become unrecognizable. "I need some time," I whispered, my voice sounding foreign even to me. "There isn't time, Mom," Jennifer sighed. "The property tax bill is due in 30 days. You don't have the money." My phone buzzed again, insistently. Probably another medical bill notification. They'd been relentless since Thomas died 6 months ago. "I think your mother needs to process this," a new voice interjected. Maggie, my younger daughter, stood in the doorway, her travel bag still in hand. She wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow, flying in from Seattle where she worked as an emergency room nurse. Unlike Jennifer's tailored dress and perfect makeup, Maggie wore faded jeans and a simple sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Margaret didn't mention you were coming today," Richard said, his displeasure evident. "I caught an earlier flight," Maggie replied, moving to stand behind my chair, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. Good thing, too. My phone buzzed a 3rd time. With shaking hands, I finally pulled it from my pocket, grateful for any distraction from the tension filling the room. The notification wasn't a bill. It was from my bank. Deposit confirmation. $4,876,342 from Willingham Trust and Estates has been successfully transferred to your account ending in 4721. Reference: Thomas Everett Monroe Estate Settlement. I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend the numbers. Thomas had been a history professor at the local college. We'd lived comfortably, but modestly. Where had nearly $5 million come from? A second notification appeared beneath the first. Secured message from Willingham Trust and Estates. Final settlement of secondary holdings and investments, as per Mr. Monroe's instructions, has been completed. All non-disclosure agreements have now expired. Full portfolio access granted. The room began to spin. Thomas had died of pancreatic cancer 6 months ago, after a brutal 18-month battle. In those final months, he'd been a shell of himself, barely able to communicate. What secrets had he been keeping? What non-disclosure agreements? "Mom, are you okay?" Maggie asked, her voice cutting through the fog. "You've gone white as a sheet." My fingers tightened around the phone as a 3rd notification appeared. Audio file from contact, Thomas Monroe. Recorded, January 12, 2023. Scheduled delivery, today, 7 p.m. An audio file, from Thomas. Scheduled to be delivered exactly at this moment, as the grandfather clock finished its chiming. I need everyone to leave, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Right now. Mom, we're not finished discussing, Jennifer began. Yes, we are. I stood, slipping the phone back into my pocket without showing them the screen. For tonight, at least, I'm tired, and I'd like to be alone. Richard looked ready to argue, but Maggie intervened. I'll make sure she's okay. We can continue this tomorrow, after everyone's had a chance to rest. Reluctantly, Jennifer gathered her designer purse and stood. We're just trying to help, Mom. You know that, right? I didn't answer. I couldn't trust myself to speak without revealing the bomb that had just exploded in my pocket. As they walked toward the door, my phone buzzed one final time. A text message from an unknown number. Mrs. Monroe, this is Andrew Willingham. Your husband asked me to check in once the funds transferred. There's much to discuss. I'm available at your convenience. The game has just begun. The door closed behind Jennifer and Richard. In the sudden silence, the weight of Thomas's secret pressed down on me like a physical presence. Whatever he had planned, whatever game he had set in motion, had just begun. And somehow, I knew it would change everything. I've always been the reliable one, the steady hand, the woman who keeps the lighthouse burning while storms rage. That's how Thomas described me when he proposed 43 years ago on the Charleston Battery, the Atlantic Ocean stretching before us like a promise. My name is Margaret Ann Monroe, though most people call me Peggy. At 65, I'm what folks around here politely call well-preserved. Silver threads among my auburn hair, laugh lines around eyes that have seen their share of joy and heartbreak. I've spent my adult life as a high school English teacher, guiding teenagers through Hemingway and Austen while raising 2 daughters of my own. Our house on Maple Street isn't the grandest in the neighborhood, but it's beautiful. A 3-story colonial with a wraparound porch where I still drink my morning coffee. Thomas and I bought it when it was practically falling down, the summer after he got tenure. We restored it room by room over decades, my hands learning to strip paint and repair plaster alongside his. Until 6 months ago, I thought I knew the rhythm of my remaining years. Thomas would retire from the college. We'd travel a bit. Nothing extravagant, just the places we'd always talked about. The Cotswolds, the Greek islands, the national parks we'd never found time to visit. Then we'd settle into a quiet routine of books and grandchildren and volunteer work, the modest retirement we'd planned for. Then came the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I'm sorry, Mrs. Monroe, the doctor said, his young face grave. We'll do everything we can. Everything wasn't enough. 18 months of surgeries, chemotherapy, radiation, watching my brilliant, vital husband shrink into a husk of himself. Towards the end, the pain medications kept him floating in and out of lucidity. Sometimes he'd grasp my hand and speak urgently about things that made no sense. Business meetings I knew he'd never attended, people whose names I didn't recognize. It's the medication, the hospice nurse assured me. The line between dreams and reality gets blurry. I believed her because it was easier than considering alternatives. Because the Thomas Monroe I'd been married to for 40 years was a history professor who specialized in Civil War economics. He wore tweed jackets with elbow patches and forgot to deposit his paychecks. He wasn't a man with secret bank accounts or mysterious trusts. After his funeral, a dignified affair at the college chapel, I tried to rebuild a life without him. My teacher's pension and Thomas's life insurance policy were enough to maintain our home, if I was careful. Jennifer and Richard, with their Charleston real estate empire, made it clear they thought I should sell and downsize. Maggie, calling from Seattle, insisted I should take time before making any decisions. I kept teaching, finding comfort in the routine of lesson plans and faculty meetings. I joined a widows' support group at the Methodist Church, but stopped going after 3 sessions. Too much casserole-laden pity, too many well-meaning suggestions about online dating. I was a widow, not an invalid seeking replacement parts. The medical bills continued to arrive. Insurance covered most, but the experimental treatments we'd tried in desperation came with hefty price tags. I started dipping into savings, then selling things. First Thomas's collection of first edition history books, then some of the antiques we'd gathered over the years. Each sale felt like peeling away another layer of our life together. Through it all, Jennifer grew increasingly insistent about the house. It's an investment opportunity, Mom, she'd say during our Sunday dinners, which had become an obligation rather than a pleasure. Maple Street properties are selling for a premium. You could buy something smaller, put the rest away for retirement. I would smile and change the subject, but the pressure mounted. Last week, she and Richard arrived with a folder full of listings for retirement communities. "Just look," she urged. "That's all we're asking." I looked, then tucked the brochures into my desk drawer and forgot about them. Yesterday morning, I received an official-looking letter from the county tax assessor. My property taxes had increased by 40% due to neighborhood appreciation, a side effect of the gentrification sweeping through our historically middle-class area. The amount due was more than I had in my checking account. When I called Jennifer in a panic, she arrived within the hour, Richard in tow. "This is actually good timing," she said, scanning the notice. "It's a sign, Mom. The universe telling you it's time to move on." Perhaps she was right. Perhaps holding on to a 3-bedroom house when I was alone was selfish and impractical. Thomas would want me to be sensible. He always handled our finances with careful precision, or so I thought. This morning, before Jennifer and Richard arrived for dinner, I pulled out my good china, the Wedgwood we received as wedding gifts. I prepared Thomas's famous pot roast recipe and opened a bottle of expensive Cabernet someone had given us last Christmas. A farewell dinner for the house that had sheltered my family, witnessed my joy and sorrow, held the echoes of my life with Thomas. I was ready to surrender, to sign whatever papers Jennifer pushed across the table, to pack up 4 decades of memories and squeeze them into a guest cottage, to become what elderly parents often become, a responsibility, a problem solved through proper management. Then my phone buzzed with that impossible notification, and Thomas's voice reached out from beyond the grave, reminding me of something I had forgotten. Nothing in life is ever quite what it seems. Now, as I sat in my quiet dining room, the remains of our dinner growing cold, I stared at my phone. My hand trembled as I touched the icon for the audio file Thomas had scheduled to reach me tonight, at precisely the moment I needed it most. "Peggy, my love, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and the funds have transferred." Thomas's voice filled my dining room, so real and present that I nearly dropped the phone in shock. It was his true voice, not the pain-ravaged whisper of his final months, but the warm, rich baritone that had read bedtime stories to our girls and lectured hall-filled auditoriums. "I've scheduled this recording to reach you at a specific time, hoping my timing isn't too late. Knowing our daughter as I do, I suspect Jennifer has already begun suggesting you sell the house." He paused, and I heard the familiar sound of his chuckle. Actually, suggesting is too gentle a word for Jennifer's approach. She's probably had Richard draw up the papers already. I glanced at the folder still sitting on my dining table, stunned by his accuracy. "Before I explain the money, and I will explain everything, I promise, I need to tell you about a conversation I had with our son-in-law 3 years ago," Thomas continued. "Richard came to my office at the college. He brought expensive scotch and cigars, trying to create some kind of male bonding moment, I suppose. After some small talk, he got to the point. He wanted to buy our house. My hands grew cold. 3 years ago, Richard and Jennifer had been pressuring me about selling for only the past 6 months, since Thomas's death. He explained that they were assembling properties on Maple Street for a development, boutique hotels, high-end retail. He offered a fair price, even generous by current market values. But when I told him we had no interest in selling, he changed tactics. "Thomas," he said, "Jennifer tells me your retirement accounts are less substantial than you'd hoped. I'm worried about Peggy's future." Thomas's voice hardened. He'd obviously seen our financial statements, our private information that only Jennifer had access to, because she'd helped us set up our estate planning after Aiden was born. Richard knew exactly how much we had, and how much we needed. Then he said something that chilled me. "Real estate in this neighborhood will crash when the hospital announces its relocation next year. You'll lose half your equity overnight." I gasped. The county hospital was Charleston's largest employer. Its downtown campus was just blocks from our home. "I did some investigating," Thomas continued. "The hospital had no relocation plans, but Richard's development company had already purchased 6 properties around ours, using shell corporations to hide their involvement. They needed our corner lot to complete the block. When I confronted him privately a week later with what I'd learned, he didn't even deny it. Instead, he offered more money and said, 'Be reasonable, Thomas. You're a history professor. This is your chance to provide real security for Peggy, for your family.'" I heard Thomas take a deep breath. Even in a recording, I could picture him removing his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose, his habit when deeply troubled. I realized 2 things that day, Peggy. First, that our son-in-law would say anything, use anyone, including our daughter, to get what he wanted. Second, that our financial situation was indeed more precarious than I'd admitted to myself. Your teacher's pension would cover basics, but not maintain the house, not provide security if you needed care someday. A long pause followed, filled with the weight of unspoken worries we'd shared through the years. We'd never been wealthy, but we'd been comfortable, or so I thought. That night, I made a call to an old friend, someone from before we met, from a life I've never fully shared with you. It's my greatest regret, this secret I've kept. Not because it's shameful, though parts of it I'm not proud of, but because marriage shouldn't have secrets of this magnitude. The dining room suddenly felt too small, too warm. I moved to the porch, clutching the phone as if it might vanish, taking Thomas's explanation with it. Outside, Charleston's evening air was heavy with jasmine and distant salt water. Before I was a history professor, before I met you, I worked in venture capital. Not just worked in it, I was good at it. Exceptionally good. I had a talent for recognizing patterns, for seeing value where others saw risk. By 30, I had more money than I knew what to do with. I lived in a penthouse in Boston, flew private, dated models and socialites. I was becoming exactly the kind of man I'd always despised. Privileged, entitled, separate from real life. I sank into the porch swing, trying to reconcile this stranger's biography with the man who'd spent hours debating the economic factors of the Civil War with undergraduates, who'd worn the same tweed jacket until the elbows wore through. Then came Black Monday, the market crash of '87. I saw it coming, Peggy. I got my clients out in time, saved their fortunes. But the aftermath was ugly. Investigations, accusations, former friends turning on each other. I wasn't involved in anything illegal, but I was disillusioned, disgusted with the whole system and my place in it. So I walked away, liquidated my holdings, put everything into blind trusts with ironclad NDAs, and disappeared. I went back to school, reinvented myself as a scholar, and then I met you. Tears blurred my vision. Our meeting had been so ordinary, a faculty mixer at the college where I'd just started teaching high school English. Thomas, newly hired as an assistant professor, spilled red wine on my white blouse. He'd been so flustered, so earnest in his apologies. I fell in love with you instantly, he continued, his voice softening. With your intelligence, your compassion, your absolute authenticity. You weren't impressed by degrees or publications. You challenged my ideas, made me defend my positions. You made me want to be worthy of your respect. I meant to tell you about my past, about the money. First, I thought I'd wait until we were engaged. Then, until after we were married. Then I worried you'd feel I'd trapped you, tricked you into marrying a wealthy man pretending to be a modest academic. The longer I waited, the harder it became to find the right moment. Eventually, I convinced myself it didn't matter. We lived on our salaries, raised our girls to value education and character over wealth. The money was just sitting there, growing through carefully managed investments. I told myself I'd explain everything when I retired. He sighed, and the sound contained all the regret of opportunities missed, words unsaid. Then came the diagnosis, and suddenly there wasn't time. Or rather, there was too much time filled with pain and medications and fear. I couldn't burden you with this revelation while you were already carrying so much. I heard him shift, papers rustling. So, here we are. My final confession. The money is yours. All of it. I've arranged everything through Andrew Willingham. He's the only person who's known my identity all these years. The trust was structured to release the funds 6 months after my death. Enough time for you to grieve, but hopefully before financial pressures became too great. His voice broke slightly. I hope you can forgive me, Peggy. Not just for keeping this secret, but for what I'm about to ask you to do. The porch swing creaked beneath me as Thomas's voice continued from my phone, the sound mingling with cicadas and distant traffic. A gibbous moon hung above the oak trees that lined Maple Street, casting dappled shadows across our front yard. Shadows that had been the backdrop to so many moments of our shared life. Do you remember our first apartment? Thomas asked suddenly, his tone lighter. That shoebox on Rutledge Avenue with the leaking ceiling and the neighbor who practiced saxophone at midnight? Despite everything, I smiled. We'd been so young. Thomas earning his doctorate, me teaching at the high school. We'd furnished that tiny apartment with cast-offs and yard sale finds, painted the walls ourselves, made love on a mattress on the floor before we could afford a proper bed. You made that place a home, Thomas continued. You hung curtains you sewed yourself, planted herbs in coffee cans on the fire escape. When it rained and that leak started, you'd just grab a pot, place it under the drip, and keep grading papers as if nothing was wrong. I closed my eyes, letting his words transport me. Those early years had been lean but sweet. We'd walk to the farmer's market on Saturdays, carefully counting out dollars for whatever vegetables were cheapest, splurging occasionally on flowers that Thomas would insist I deserved. Then Jennifer came along, and suddenly our little apartment seemed even smaller, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Remember how tiny she was? How we were terrified they'd let us take her home from the hospital without proving we were qualified? Jennifer had been 7 pounds of determination from her first breath. While other babies slept, she watched, her dark eyes taking in everything. She pointed before she could talk, demanded with gestures before she had words. Thomas adored her, carrying her around the apartment, showing her his books, telling her stories about historical figures as if she could understand. She was always so certain about what she wanted, Thomas said. Even as a toddler, I thought that strength would serve her well in life. I still believe it could, if it were anchored to something beyond acquisition. But somewhere along the way, and this is partly my fault, I know, she learned to measure success in possessions rather than purpose. The pain in his voice was palpable. We'd both watched in mounting concern as Jennifer, our brilliant, capable daughter, hitched her star to Richard's rising real estate empire. She'd abandoned her plans for law school, focusing instead on becoming the perfect corporate wife, managing their social calendar, serving on the right charity boards, producing a beautiful grandson who was shuttled between nannies and exclusive preschools. And then there's our Maggie, Thomas said, his voice warming again. Our surprise blessing. Maggie had arrived nearly a decade after Jennifer, unplanned but immediately cherished. Where Jennifer had been intense and focused from infancy, Maggie was sunshine, curious, affectionate, perpetually disheveled, constantly collecting strays, whether injured birds or overlooked classmates. You probably don't know this, Thomas continued, but Maggie came to see me alone in the hospital about 2 months before the end. She'd noticed discrepancies in some of my medications. Being a nurse, she recognized signs that weren't matching my official diagnosis. She thought Jennifer or Richard might be making decisions about my care without consulting you. I sat upright, the swing jerking to a halt. What? She was right to be concerned, though not in the way she thought, Thomas said heavily. The experimental treatments we tried toward the end, Peggy, they weren't covered by insurance because they weren't actually related to pancreatic cancer. I had the doctors falsify certain records. I couldn't bear for you to know that the cancer had spread to my brain. The cognitive symptoms would have progressed rapidly. I would have lost myself before I lost my life. A sob escaped me. All those moments in those final months when he seemed confused, when he didn't recognize me or thought we were in a different time or place, I'd attributed them to the pain medication. I swore Maggie to secrecy. I told her you had enough to bear without knowing what was coming. She disagreed vehemently. You know how she is about medical honesty, but ultimately respected my choice. She stayed with me that night, holding my hand while I drifted in and out of clarity. Before she left, she promised to look after you when I was gone. Not like Jennifer wants to look after you, she said. Actually looking after you, letting you be who you are. Tears streamed down my face freely now. That sounded exactly like Maggie, my fierce, compassionate daughter who lived 3,000 miles away, because Charleston had always felt too constraining for her spirit. I'm telling you this, Peggy, because I want you to understand the full picture of our family before I explain what I've arranged. The money is only part of it. I've set certain conditions in motion. A test of sorts. He paused, and I heard him take a sip of something. Tea, probably. Even in his final recordings, Thomas would have had tea at his elbow. When we moved into this house on Maple Street, you were 5 months pregnant with Jennifer. Remember how rundown it was? The real estate agent actually apologized for showing it to us, but you walked through those empty rooms with your hand on your belly, describing exactly what each space could become. I looked up at our home, a dark silhouette against the night sky, the wraparound porch where neighborhood children had played, the bay window where we'd placed the Christmas tree each year. The attic Thomas had converted into a study, lining the walls with bookshelves he built himself. On our first night here, We had no furniture yet except an air mattress. We lay on that mattress in the empty living room, planning our future. You told me about the gardens you'd plant, the children who would run up and down the stairs, the holidays we'd host, the memories we'd create within these walls. You saw not what the house was, but what it could be with love and care and time. His voice caught slightly. That's always been your gift, Peggy. Seeing potential, in places, in your students, in our daughters, in me. You took a disillusioned ex-financier and helped him become a man with purpose. You never even knew you were doing it. That's the purest kind of love, the kind that transforms without agenda. The tears came faster now, memories flooding back. Thomas bringing home seedlings for the garden, teaching Jennifer to ride a bike on the driveway, building Maggie a treehouse in the backyard oak, hundreds of dinners at our dining room table, thousands of cups of coffee on this very porch, a lifetime of small moments that added up to something profound. This house isn't just wood and plaster, Peggy. It's the physical manifestation of the life we built together. That's why I couldn't tell Richard yes when he wanted to buy it. That's why I reactivated old contacts, moved investments, prepared this contingency, because I knew they would come after it once I was gone. And I couldn't bear the thought of you being pressured to give up the home we made, to be tucked away in some guest cottage where you'd fade into a supporting character in your own life. I clutched the phone tighter, suddenly understanding the magnitude of what Thomas had done. He hadn't just left me money. He'd created a fortress around our home, around my independence. Over the years, he continued, I watched Richard's business practices with growing concern. Nothing explicitly illegal, but ethically questionable at best. The development plans for this neighborhood would displace dozens of families who've lived here for generations. The urban renewal he promotes at city council meetings is a sanitized term for gentrification. Thomas had never shared these concerns with me directly. He'd always been careful not to criticize Jennifer's choice of husband, to maintain peace in the family. 2 years ago, I hired a private investigator to look into Brighton Development Group, the parent company behind all of Richard's ventures. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions and more. I've kept detailed records, which Andrew Willingham will share with you. Not for revenge, Peggy, for protection. Knowledge is power, and you'll need both in the coming months. His voice softened again. I've asked so much of you over the years. Your patience during my academic obsessions, your strength during my illness, your forgiveness, I hope, for this final deception about our finances. Now I must ask one thing more. Trust the plan I've set in motion. It isn't just about the money or the house. It's about justice, in its way, and about giving our daughters a chance to reveal their true characters when they believe the stakes are highest. I stared out at the quiet street, trying to absorb it all. Thomas, my tweed-wearing, absent-minded professor husband, had orchestrated an elaborate financial scheme that had culminated in tonight's revelation. He had known somehow that this exact scenario would unfold. Jennifer and Richard pressuring me to sell, presenting me with papers, believing me desperate and alone. He had timed his message perfectly, a lifeboat arriving just as the waters closed over my head. I've loved you more than I ever thought possible, Thomas said, his voice now heavy with emotion. If I have any regret, it's not being completely honest about who I was before we met, but I never lied about who I became with you. That man, the professor, the father, your husband, that was my truest self. The recording fell silent for a moment. Then Thomas spoke once more, his voice steady and certain. It's time to show our daughter and son-in-law exactly who Margaret Ann Monroe is. Not just a widow to be managed, not just a house to be acquired, but a formidable woman who has more resources and more allies than they could possibly imagine. I slept fitfully that night, Thomas's revelations echoing through my dreams. When morning came, I moved through my usual routine as if underwater, making coffee, feeding the cat, watering the porch ferns. The world looked the same, but everything had shifted. At precisely 9 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Andrew Willingham, a tall, silver-haired man with kind eyes behind tortoise-shell glasses, introduced himself on my doorstep, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Mrs. Monroe, he said, taking my hand in both of his. Thomas spoke of you so often. I feel I've known you for years. May I come in? For the next 2 hours, Andrew walked me through Thomas's financial empire, because that's what it was. An empire built on early tech investments, strategic real estate holdings, and venture capital stakes in companies that had grown into household names. The trust had been managed silently, profits reinvested, its existence protected by legal barriers that would make Fort Knox envious. Thomas was brilliant with money, Andrew explained, spreading documents across my dining room table. He could have been a billionaire many times over if accumulation had been his goal, but after he met you, his priorities changed. He redirected significant portions of his wealth to education foundations, historical preservation trusts, medical research, all anonymously. I stared at the papers, at numbers with more zeros than I could easily comprehend. All this time, I whispered. All these years of budgeting, of saving for retirement, of worrying. Andrew's expression was sympathetic, but unapologetic. Thomas struggled with the decision to keep this from you, but he valued the life you built together on your own terms. He worried that great wealth might change that, might change you both. And now? I asked, looking up from the documents. What am I supposed to do with all this? Andrew smiled slightly. Whatever you wish, Mrs. Monroe. The money is yours without restriction. However, he added, his tone shifting, Thomas did have suggestions regarding your immediate situation with your daughter and son-in-law. He outlined what Thomas had set in motion, a carefully orchestrated series of revelations designed to expose Richard's business practices while protecting both Jennifer and me from the fallout. The plan was elegant, comprehensive, and slightly terrifying in its thoroughness. Thomas believed you would want the option to salvage your daughter's marriage if possible, Andrew explained. These steps are designed to give Richard a chance to change course before more drastic measures become necessary. By the time he left, I felt simultaneously empowered and overwhelmed. Thomas had given me weapons I'd never imagined possessing, along with the moral quandary of whether and how to use them. I spent the afternoon in Thomas's study, reading through his private journals, records he'd kept of his concerns about Richard, transcripts of conversations, evidence he'd gathered through his investigator. With each page, my stomach knotted tighter. The man my daughter had married was not simply ambitious, he was ruthless, manipulating city zoning boards, pressuring elderly homeowners, using insider information to target properties before public announcements sent values soaring. At 6 o'clock, my phone rang. Jennifer. Mom, Richard and I are coming over to finish our discussion from last night, she said, without preamble. We've brought the final paperwork for the house sale and guest cottage transfer. The realtor needs signatures by tomorrow to meet the timeline. What timeline would that be? I asked, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. Jennifer hesitated. The market fluctuations, interest rates. It's complicated, Mom. Richard can explain when we get there. I'm sure he can, I replied. What time should I expect you? We'll be there at 7. Don't worry about dinner. We've already eaten. How considerate of them, I thought, as I hung up, not to expect a meal from the mother they were planning to dispossess. I changed into a simple black dress, one Thomas had always loved, and pearl earrings he'd given me for our 30th anniversary. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of wine, then sat on the porch to wait, Andrew Willingham's business card in my pocket like a talisman. They arrived precisely at 7. Jennifer in a designer suit that probably cost more than a month of my teacher's salary. Richard carrying the same leather portfolio he'd brought yesterday. Maggie came with them, sliding me a conspiratorial glance as she followed them up the porch steps. You look nice, Mom, Jennifer said, kissing my cheek absently. Feeling better about things today? Much better, I replied, leading them into the living room where I'd arranged seating, the wingback chairs for them, the sofa for Maggie and me. In fact, I've been doing some thinking about my financial situation. Richard settled into a chair, opening his portfolio. Excellent. As I was explaining yesterday, the guest cottage option really is ideal. It's a turnkey solution that... Actually, I interrupted, I've decided not to sell the house. The silence that followed was absolute. Jennifer and Richard exchanged glances. Mom? Jennifer began in the tone she used with Aiden when he was being difficult. We discussed this. You can't afford to keep this place. The property taxes alone won't be a problem, I finished for her. You see, I've had a rather unexpected change in my financial circumstances. Richard's expression sharpened. What kind of change? It seems your father-in-law was more resourceful than any of us realized, I said, watching Richard's face carefully. He left provisions I wasn't aware of until recently. What provisions? Jennifer asked, her perfectly plucked eyebrows drawing together. Dad's will was straightforward. The house, his pension, the life insurance policy. There wasn't anything else. I smiled slightly. Those were the visible assets, yes. But Thomas had other resources. Richard set his portfolio aside, all pretense of casual concern vanishing. What exactly are you saying, Margaret? I'm saying that I received a substantial inheritance yesterday, one that resolves any concerns about my ability to maintain this home or support myself. Jennifer laughed, the sound brittle. Mom, that's impossible. Daddy was a professor. Where would he get substantial money? Before he was a professor, he was something else entirely, I said. Something he kept private for his own reasons. But the result is that I'm now quite comfortable. More than comfortable, actually. This is ridiculous, Richard said dismissively. Thomas Monroe taught history at Charleston College for 40 years. He didn't have secret millions stashed away. Not millions, I agreed, watching their faces. The current value of the trust is just under $5 million. The color drained from Richard's face. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. That's not possible, she finally managed. We would have known. The estate planning was handled separately, I explained, through a trust managed by Andrew Willingham. Perhaps you've heard of Willingham Trust and Estates? They handle private banking for a rather exclusive clientele. Richard stood abruptly. This is some kind of misunderstanding. Or a scam. Elderly widows are prime targets for fraudsters, Margaret. We need to be careful about... It's not a scam, Richard, Maggie interjected from beside me. I spoke with Mr. Willingham myself this afternoon. The funds are real, they're legitimate, and they're Mom's. Richard turned to her, his expression hardening. You knew about this? Maggie shook her head. Not until today. Dad never told me about the money, but he did share certain concerns with me during his illness. Concerns about what might happen after he was gone. What's that supposed to mean? Jennifer demanded, standing to join her husband. What concerns? He worried that the two of you might pressure Mom to sell this house, Maggie said bluntly. That you might try to control her life, her choices, her future. Jennifer's face flushed. We're trying to help. Mom's not equipped to manage a property this size, to make financial decisions of this magnitude. I managed to raise you while teaching full-time and supporting your father's career. I interrupted, my voice steady. I've served on the board of the Teachers Credit Union for 15 years. I think I can handle paying property taxes, Jennifer. This isn't about taxes, Richard snapped. This is about practical considerations for a widow living alone. This neighborhood is changing. It's not as safe as it once was. Changing because of developers buying up properties for commercial use, I noted. Developers like Brighton Group. Your company, Richard. The room went very still. How do you know about Brighton? He asked carefully. Thomas knew, I said. He knew about the shell corporations, the property acquisitions, the plans for this block. He knew you approached him 3 years ago, hoping to buy our home as part of your development strategy. Jennifer turned to her husband, confusion evident on her face. What is she talking about? What development strategy? Richard ignored her, his attention fixed on me. Whatever Thomas told you, it was a misunderstanding. My interest in helping you relocate is purely out of concern for your well-being. Is that why you told Thomas the hospital was relocating when it wasn't? I asked. Out of concern? Is that why you've been pressuring elderly homeowners up and down this street to sell below market value? Why you've used inside information from zoning board meetings to target properties before public announcements? Richard's face hardened into a mask. You have no idea what you're talking about. These are complex business matters that my husband documented extensively. I finished for him. Thomas was thorough, Richard. Methodical. He kept records of every conversation, every inconsistency. He hired investigators who tracked your acquisitions back to their source. You're bluffing, Richard said, but doubt flickered in his eyes. Brighton Development Group, I recited from memory. Parent company to Low Country Holdings LLC, Palmetto Acquisition Partners, and 5 other entities, all tracing back to you. All involved in purchasing properties within a 3-block radius of this house over the past 4 years. Properties now slated for the Magnolia, a mixed-use development featuring boutique hotels and luxury retail, pending final zoning approval next month. Jennifer sank back into her chair. Richard, is this true? Have you been planning to develop Mom's neighborhood without telling any of us? Richard's expression shifted, calculating. It's a business opportunity, Jennifer. A significant one. Your mother's house is a key property for the final phase. The returns would benefit all of us, including her. Except you never presented it as a business proposition, I pointed out. You presented it as concern for my welfare. You manufactured a financial crisis to pressure me into selling. I was trying to help you, Richard exploded. Yes, the development would benefit from acquiring this property. But you would benefit more. Do you have any idea what this house is worth as part of the Magnolia project? 3 times its residential value at least. So you lied to me, Jennifer said quietly. To all of us. Richard turned to her impatiently. I protected you from unnecessary complications. The development is perfectly legal. The zoning variances will be approved next month. Your mother would have received fair compensation. Fair compensation determined by you, I interrupted, while pressuring me to believe I was broke and desperate. This is insane, Richard said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. You're twisting everything, making me out to be some kind of villain for trying to help this family prosper. Prosper at what cost? Maggie asked. By uprooting Mom from her home? By lying to your wife? By keeping everyone in the dark about your real intentions? Richard gathered his portfolio, movements sharp with anger. I don't have to justify my business decisions to either of you. Jennifer, we're leaving. My daughter didn't move. Did you know? She asked me, her voice small. Before yesterday. Did you know about Dad's money? About Richard's plans? I shook my head. Your father kept his financial past secret from all of us, and I had no idea about Richard's development project until last night. But Dad knew, she pressed. He knew about Richard's plans. He knew and he... What? Set up some kind of trap? Arranged for you to receive this inheritance right when Richard was pushing for the house sale? Not a trap, I said gently. Protection. He wanted me to have choices, to be able to make decisions without financial pressure. Jennifer's carefully composed face crumpled suddenly. So he trusted you with the truth, but not me. He told Maggie about his concerns, but not me, because he knew I couldn't be trusted, that I'd side with Richard against my own mother. That's not... I began, but she cut me off. And the worst part is, he was right. Tears spilled down her cheeks, smearing her perfect makeup. I brought those papers here yesterday. I was ready to move you into a glorified shed so Richard could build his luxury shops. I didn't question any of it because I thought we were helping you. Jennifer, don't do this now, Richard warned. We can discuss everything at home. She looked up at him, really looked, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Did you ever intend to tell me the truth about the development? About approaching Dad years ago? Richard's jaw tightened. Business and family are separate matters. I was protecting you from unnecessary complications. By lying to me, she said flatly. By manipulating my father. By using me to pressure my mother. This is melodramatic nonsense, Richard snapped. Your father played games with his secret millions while pretending to be a humble academic. He's hardly a paragon of honesty, and now he's manipulating all of you from beyond the grave. The room fell silent. Even Richard seemed to realize he'd gone too far. Get out of my house, I said quietly. Margaret. Now, Richard, get out. I won't tell you twice. He looked from me to Jennifer, who remained seated, tears streaming down her face. Fine, he said finally. Take some time to calm down. We'll discuss this tomorrow when everyone's thinking clearly. He turned to Jennifer. Are you coming? She didn't look up. No, I'm staying with my mother tonight. Richard's face hardened. Without another word, he strode out. Seconds later, the front door slammed, rattling the family photos that lined our hallway. In the sudden quiet, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking, marking the seconds of this new reality. Jennifer sat motionless, tears falling onto her expensive silk blouse. Maggie moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. The sisters couldn't have looked more different. Jennifer in her tailored suit and pearls, Maggie in jeans and a sweater. Yet in that moment, I saw the connection that had existed between them since childhood, before adult choices had driven them apart. I've been so stupid, Jennifer whispered. So blind. I knelt before her, taking her other hand. We see what we want to see in the people we love, I said gently. Your father kept secrets too. None of us are perfect. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed but suddenly fierce. What Richard did, trying to take your home under false pretenses, that's unforgivable. Using me against you is unforgivable. What happens now is your choice, I told her. Thomas left evidence of Richard's business practices, but he also left the decision of what to do with that evidence to me. And my decision will depend largely on what you want, Jennifer. I don't know what I want, she admitted, except that I need some time to think, to figure out who I am apart from Richard, apart from the life we've built. I nodded, squeezing her hand. You have time now, and you have options. We all do. The three of us sat together as evening deepened into night, the weight of revelations hanging in the air between us. Nothing was resolved, nothing fixed, but for the first time in too long, the truth stood naked in our family circle, painful, complicated, but ultimately freeing. Morning light streamed through my bedroom windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. For a moment, I lay still, letting the events of the previous day settle into reality rather than some bizarre dream. Thomas's hidden millions, Richard's exposed schemes, Jennifer's tears on my living room floor. The house was quiet. After our confrontation with Richard, the three of us had talked late into the night. Jennifer had taken the guest room, her childhood bedroom long since converted to a study, while Maggie slept on the pull-out sofa in the den. For the first time in years, both my daughters were under my roof again, though under circumstances none of us could have imagined. I padded downstairs in my robe, following the scent of coffee. To my surprise, Jennifer stood at the kitchen counter in borrowed sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, face scrubbed clean of makeup. Without her usual armor of designer clothes and perfect grooming, she looked younger, more vulnerable, more like the daughter I remembered. I hope it's okay I made coffee, she said, gesturing to the pot. Couldn't sleep past 6. Force of habit. Of course it's okay, I replied, accepting the mug she offered. You look like you've been thinking. She gave a short laugh. All night. I checked my phone this morning. 12 missed calls from Richard. 23 text messages. I haven't read them. We settled at the kitchen table, morning sunlight warming the worn wooden surface. For a moment, we just sat in silence, sipping our coffee. I keep coming back to the same question, Jennifer finally said. How could I not have seen it? Any of it? Seen what exactly? Richard. Who he really is. What he's been doing. She stared into her mug. The way he talks to you. The way he talked about Dad after he died. So dismissive, so condescending. I heard it. I saw it. But I didn't let myself acknowledge it. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. We construct narratives that help us make sense of our choices. Once we've committed to those narratives, contradictory evidence becomes very difficult to process. The English teacher in you is showing, she said with a faint smile. Then more seriously, I built my entire life around Richard's ambitions. His goals became my goals. His success, my success. Somewhere along the way, I forgot to ask what I actually wanted. What do you want, Jennifer? I asked quietly. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. No one's asked me that in a very long time. She was silent for a moment. I don't know. That's the terrifying part. I honestly don't know. Footsteps on the stairs announced Maggie's arrival. She entered the kitchen in rumpled pajamas, her dark hair a wild tangle around her face. Coffee exists. Thank God. She poured herself a mug, then joined us at the table. How are we feeling this morning? Still processing the fact that Dad was secretly rich and Richard is secretly awful? Jennifer winced. Not so secretly awful, apparently. Just secretly to me. Maggie's expression softened. Hey, I didn't mean it like that. Richard is complicated. He's a good father to Aiden. He can be charming and generous when it suits him. People contain multitudes or whatever. But you never liked him, Jennifer said. It wasn't a question. I never trusted him, Maggie corrected. There's a difference. But my opinion isn't what matters here. Yours is. Jennifer nodded slowly. I need to decide what to do about my marriage. About Richard's business practices. About... She hesitated, then looked at me directly. About the fact that my husband tried to manipulate my mother out of her home for financial gain. The bluntness of her statement hung in the air between us. No sugarcoating, no excuses. Just the hard truth laid bare. You don't have to decide everything today, I said gently. No, but I do need to start somewhere. She squared her shoulders, a gesture so reminiscent of Thomas that my heart clenched. I want to see the evidence Dad collected about Richard's business dealings. All of it. I hesitated. Are you sure? It's extensive and troubling. I'm sure. I need to know exactly what I've been complicit in, even unknowingly. I nodded, then rose to retrieve the files from Thomas's study. When I returned, the three of us spent the next hour reviewing documents, transcripts, and photographs that detailed Richard's systematic approach to acquiring properties for the Magnolia development. He targeted elderly homeowners first, Jennifer noted, her voice hollow as she paged through the evidence. People living alone, often with limited finances, made lowball offers through shell companies so they wouldn't know it was part of a larger development, used high-pressure tactics, spread rumors about property values dropping. She looked up, her expression stricken. It's exactly what he tried to do to you, Mom. Yes, I acknowledged. It was. She set aside a particularly damning document, a transcript of Richard discussing with a business partner how to circumvent historical preservation restrictions. What I don't understand is why Dad didn't confront him. Why keep collecting all this evidence secretly instead of just telling me? I think he was trying to protect you, Maggie suggested. If he'd shown you this while he was alive, it would have forced an immediate crisis in your marriage. He wanted to give Richard a chance to change course. Or maybe he didn't think I'd believe him, Jennifer said bitterly. Maybe he thought I was too far gone, too devoted to Richard to accept the truth. Or maybe he simply ran out of time, I offered. The cancer progressed so quickly at the end. There were so many things left unsaid, plans left unfinished. Jennifer nodded slowly, then closed the folder. I need to go home. I need to talk to Richard face to face. Are you sure that's wise? Maggie asked, concern evident in her voice. Maybe you need more time to process all this. I'm not going to make any permanent decisions today, Jennifer assured her. But I can't hide in Mom's house while my phone explodes with messages. And I need to see Aiden. He'll be confused about why I didn't come home last night. I understood her reasoning, but worry gnawed at me. Will you be all right? She gave me a wan smile. Probably not, but I'll be careful, and I'll call you later. After Jennifer left to borrow more suitable clothes from Maggie, I found myself alone in the kitchen. I ran my fingers along the counter edge, feeling the small chip in the marble that had been there since Maggie was 10, and dropped a cast iron pan. Every corner of this house held memories, layers of our family history embedded in its very walls. For decades, I had defined myself primarily through my relationships to others, Thomas's wife, Jennifer, and Maggie's mother, a teacher to generations of students. I had found purpose and meaning in those connections, in nurturing and supporting the people around me. There had been satisfaction in that life, genuine joy in its simplest moments. But now, with Thomas gone and this unexpected inheritance shifting the ground beneath my feet, I found myself facing a question similar to Jennifer's. What did I want? Who was Margaret Monroe when stripped of the roles that had defined her for so long? I carried my coffee to the back porch, settling into the wicker chair that overlooked my garden. Thomas had installed the irrigation system 2 summers ago, insisting it would make things easier for me later. Had he known even then that his time was limited? Had he been preparing, in 100 small ways, for my life without him? My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Andrew Willingham. Mrs. Monroe. He greeted me when I answered. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all. I've been up for hours. Excellent. I'm calling because there's been a development regarding the Magnolia project. The City Planning Commission has scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday to review zoning requests. It seems someone has submitted evidence of irregularities in the application process. My pulse quickened. What kind of irregularities? Documents suggesting that certain commission members may have received financial incentives to expedite approvals. Nothing has been proven, of course, but the mere suggestion has raised enough concerns to warrant investigation. Would these documents happen to be from Thomas's files? Andrew paused. I'm not at liberty to discuss the source. However, I can tell you that Thomas arranged for certain information to be delivered to the appropriate authorities at specific triggering events. Your son-in-law's attempt to acquire your property appears to have been one such trigger. I closed my eyes, trying to absorb what this meant. So Thomas set up a dead man's switch. If Richard tried to take my home, evidence of his questionable business practices would be revealed. A crude but essentially accurate description, Andrew confirmed. Thomas was quite thorough in his contingency planning. The question now is whether you wish these proceedings to continue. There are mechanisms in place to either accelerate or dampen the investigation, depending on your preference. I need to think about this, I said slowly. My daughter just left to confront her husband. I don't know what she'll decide about their marriage. about her role in his business. Of course, there's no immediate urgency. The Planning Commission meeting will likely result only in a temporary suspension of the Magnolia project while they review the evidence. It buys us time without forcing more drastic action. After we hung up, I sat motionless, watching bees flit between the lavender bushes Thomas had planted along the garden path. The implications of what he had arranged were staggering. He had created a sophisticated system of financial and legal tripwires designed to protect me and expose Richard, all triggered by specific actions I couldn't have predicted, but Thomas somehow had. My brilliant, methodical husband had transformed himself from history professor to mastermind, orchestrating events from beyond the grave with uncanny precision. I should have felt manipulated, perhaps even angry that he had kept so much from me. Instead, I felt a strange, growing exhilaration. For the first time in my life, I held genuine power, not just the soft influence of a supportive wife or nurturing mother, but tangible, consequential power, financial security that couldn't be threatened, evidence that could reshape the future of Charleston's development, knowledge that gave me leverage where I had previously had none. The question was no longer what Thomas had arranged, or why he had done it. The question was what I would do with the tools he had placed in my hands. Maggie found me still sitting on the porch an hour later, my coffee long since cold. "You okay?" she asked, dropping into the chair beside me. "You've got a strange look on your face." "I'm fine," I replied, just processing, trying to understand who I am in this new reality. She studied me for a moment. "You know, when Dad was really sick, he said something to me that didn't make sense at the time. He said, 'Your mother is stronger than any of us realize. She just hasn't had the chance to discover it yet.'" A lump formed in my throat. "He said that?" Maggie nodded. "I thought it was the pain medication talking. Mom, the English teacher versus corrupt real estate developers didn't seem like a fair fight." She grinned suddenly. "Turns out Dad knew exactly what he was doing, arming you with $5 million and enough evidence to torpedo Richard's entire business model." "Despite everything," I laughed. "When you put it that way, it does sound rather calculated." "It sounds badass is what it sounds like," Maggie corrected. "Dad setting up a financial dead man's switch to protect you? That's some serious James Bond stuff right there." I shook my head, still smiling. "Thomas Monroe, secret millionaire and master strategist. Who would have thought? I always knew there was more to Dad than tweed jackets and Civil War lectures," Maggie said. "He had this watchfulness about him, like he was seeing things the rest of us missed." She was right. Thomas had always been observant, quietly assessing situations and people while appearing pleasantly distracted. It was what had made him an exceptional historian, his ability to see patterns across time, to connect seemingly unrelated events into meaningful narratives. "The question is," Maggie continued, "what are you going to do now? With the money, with Dad's evidence, with everything?" I looked out at my garden, at the home Thomas and I had built together, at the life I had thought was ending, but was perhaps just beginning. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But for the first time in a very long while, I'm going to make that decision based on what I want, not what others expect of me." Maggie reached over and squeezed my hand. "That sounds like exactly what Dad was hoping for." My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Made it home. Richard not here. Going to pack some things for Aiden and me. We'll call later." I showed the message to Maggie, who nodded approvingly. "Good. She needs space to think clearly, away from his influence." "This isn't how I wanted things to unfold for her," I said quietly. "Her marriage falling apart, her whole life upended. Maybe it needed to fall apart," Maggie suggested gently. "Maybe it was built on a foundation that couldn't last." Before I could respond, another text appeared, this one from an unknown number. "Mrs. Monroe, this is Mayor Harrington. I understand you may have information relevant to the Magnolia Development Project. I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss this matter with you privately. At your convenience, of course." I stared at the screen, then showed it to Maggie, whose eyes widened. "The mayor? How did he get your number? How does he even know you're involved?" "I have no idea," I replied. "But it seems Thomas's carefully laid plans are accelerating faster than anyone anticipated." Maggie leaned forward, her expression intense. "Mom, do you realize what this means? Richard's development isn't just some small-time project. If the mayor is personally reaching out, there are major political implications. Serious money involved." I nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place, which means Richard has powerful allies and powerful enemies, and somehow you're now at the center of it all. Maggie shook her head in amazement. Dad really did throw you into the deep end. Yes, he had. But as I sat there, contemplating my next move, I realized something surprising. I wasn't afraid. For the first time since Thomas's death, since perhaps long before that, I felt fully awake, present, purposeful. The passive widow that Richard and Jennifer had tried to manage no longer existed. In her place stood a woman with resources, knowledge, and a growing determination to chart her own course. I think, I said slowly, it's time I had a conversation with Mayor Harrington. And perhaps a few other key people in this city. Maggie's face broke into a broad smile. Mom's entering her villain era. I am here for it. Not villain, I corrected her. Just no longer supporting caste in my own life story. As if to underscore my words, the grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime. Noon, a new day, halfway begun. A line from one of Thomas's favorite poems drifted through my mind. The future enters into us in order to transform itself in us long before it happens. The transformation had begun. I was ready. The mayor's office was exactly as I expected, tastefully appointed with Charleston artifacts and historical photographs. The requisite portrait of a Revolutionary War ancestor hanging prominently behind an imposing mahogany desk. Mayor James Harrington himself was a study in careful political presentation. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, navy suit impeccably tailored, American flag pin gleaming on his lapel. Mrs. Monroe, he said, rising to shake my hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice. I've had the pleasure of reading some of your late husband's historical analyses. Brilliant work. A tremendous loss to our academic community. Thank you, I replied, settling into the visitor's chair. I'd dressed deliberately for this meeting. A conservative navy dress, pearl earrings, sensible pumps. The epitome of a respectable widow. Only the leather portfolio I carried, containing selected documents from Thomas's files, hinted at my true purpose. I understand you've recently become concerned about the Magnolia Development Project, the mayor continued, his tone carefully neutral. A project that, I should note, promises significant economic benefits for our city. So I've heard, I acknowledged. 300 jobs during construction. 50 million in private investment. Tax revenue to fund infrastructure improvements downtown. The economic argument is quite compelling. The mayor smiled, relaxing slightly. Exactly. The city council has been very supportive of Brighton Development's vision. Richard Green has been instrumental in bringing this opportunity to fruition. My son-in-law is certainly ambitious, I agreed mildly, though his methods are what concern me. The smile faltered. I'm not sure I follow. I opened my portfolio, removing a thin stack of documents. These are copies, I said, sliding them across the desk. The originals are securely stored with my attorney. They detail how Brighton Development used shell companies to acquire properties at below market rates, often employing pressure tactics against elderly homeowners. They also suggest that certain members of the Planning Commission received financial incentives to expedite zoning approvals. Mayor Harrington didn't touch the papers. These are serious allegations, Mrs. Monroe. They're documented facts, Mayor Harrington. Facts that my late husband collected over 3 years, anticipating that I might need protection from my son-in-law's business practices after Thomas was gone. The mayor's expression shifted, professional concern replacing political affability. I'm sorry to hear about family difficulties, but private real estate transactions and zoning applications are complex matters. What may appear questionable to a layperson often has perfectly legitimate explanations. Perhaps, I conceded, but I believe the State Attorney General's office might have a different perspective, particularly regarding the payments to commission members. I removed another document from my portfolio. This is a record of 5 separate wire transfers from Palmetto Acquisition Partners, one of Richard's shell companies, to accounts owned by Commissioner Wilson's construction business. Curiously, each transfer occurred within 48 hours of a crucial vote benefiting the Magnolia Project. The mayor's face remained impassive, but I noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. Commissioner Wilson has recused himself from votes directly involving Brighton Development. From votes explicitly naming Brighton, yes, but not from votes involving entities that appear unrelated but are actually controlled by my son-in-law. The corporate structure is quite elaborate, deliberately obscure, one might say. Mrs. Monroe, the mayor said, leaning forward slightly, what exactly is it you want? I understand you may have personal grievances with your son-in-law, but this isn't about personal grievances, I interrupted, my voice still calm but firm. This is about protecting my home and my community from predatory development practices. The Magnolia Project, as currently designed, would displace dozens of families who've lived in this neighborhood for generations. It would replace historic homes with luxury boutiques and overpriced hotels. It would transform a residential community into a tourist attraction. The mayor sighed, removing his glasses to polish them, a delaying tactic I recognized from years of faculty meetings. Progress requires change, Mrs. Monroe. Charleston's economy depends on tourism. Development like the Magnolia creates jobs, increases property values. For whom? I asked quietly. Who benefits from those increased property values when the original residents can no longer afford to stay? Who gets those jobs when the businesses cater to luxury tourism? He replaced his glasses, studying me with newfound interest. You sound like your husband. Thomas was quite passionate about historical preservation and community continuity. I recall several rather pointed editorials he wrote for the Post and Courier. We shared many values, I acknowledged, including a belief that progress shouldn't come at the expense of community. Admirable sentiments, the mayor said, his tone suggesting he found them more naive than admirable. But the reality of city governance requires balancing many competing interests. The Magnolia Project has considerable support from business leaders, the Chamber of Commerce, the Tourism Board, and considerable opposition from neighborhood associations, historical preservation groups, and affordable housing advocates, I countered. Groups that vote in significant numbers, I believe. The mayor's expression sharpened. Are you threatening me, Mrs. Monroe? Not at all, I replied mildly, simply observing political realities. These documents could create significant difficulties for your administration if they became public. The upcoming election is, 7 months away? Hardly enough time to weather a corruption scandal. He was silent for a long moment, reassessing me. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, weighing political risk against potential reward, measuring the threat I represented against the benefits of the Magnolia Project. What would you suggest as an alternative? He finally asked. I removed a final document from my portfolio, a concept plan Thomas had commissioned from an urban planning consultant before his death. Mixed-use development that preserves the existing neighborhood character. Affordable housing units alongside market-rate homes. Small-scale retail focused on local businesses rather than luxury chains. Green space. Community facilities. The mayor accepted the document, scanning it with professional interest. Ambitious, expensive, significantly less profitable for developers, but more beneficial for the community, I pointed out, and considerably less controversial than the current plan. No scandal, no investigation, no uncomfortable questions during election season. He set the proposal aside, steepling his fingers. You've clearly given this considerable thought, Mrs. Monroe. May I ask what sparked this? Civic engagement? My understanding was that you were a high school English teacher, not a community activist. People change, I said simply. Sometimes circumstances require it. Indeed. He studied me a moment longer, then nodded as if coming to a decision. I appreciate you bringing these concerns directly to me, rather than pursuing other avenues. It shows a commendable respect for proper channels. Translation. Thank you for not going to the press or the state attorney's office first. I detected the subtle shift in our conversation, from dismissal to negotiation. The mayor was taking me seriously now, recognizing that I held cards he couldn't afford to ignore. The planning commission meeting scheduled for Monday, I said. I understand it was called to review certain aspects of the Magnolia zoning application. Yes, routine procedural matters, he said smoothly. Nothing substantive. Perhaps it could become more substantive, I suggested. An opportunity to reconsider the project's overall direction, to explore alternatives that might better serve the community's long-term interests. The mayor leaned back in his chair, regarding me thoughtfully. You're proposing I use Monday's meeting to essentially reopen the entire approval process. I'm proposing you demonstrate leadership by ensuring development serves the entire community, not just its wealthiest members. I closed my portfolio, signaling that our meeting was concluding. The alternative is these documents finding their way to the State Attorney General, the Ethics Commission, and the Charleston Post and Courier, simultaneously. I imagine the resulting investigation would complicate not just the Magnolia Project, but your entire administrative agenda. He stood as I did, his expression unreadable. You've made your point with remarkable clarity, Mrs. Monroe. I'll consider your suggestions carefully. That's all I ask, I replied, extending my hand. Thank you for your time, Mayor Harrington. As I left City Hall, I felt strangely calm. The woman who had entered that building, quiet, deferential, easily dismissed, was not the woman who emerged. Thomas had provided the ammunition, but I had chosen how to deploy it. The decisions, the strategy, the calculated risk, those were mine. My phone rang as I reached my car. Jennifer. Mom, she said when I answered, her voice tight with emotion. We need to talk. Can I come over? Of course. I'm just leaving downtown now. I'll be home in 20 minutes. Downtown? What were you doing there? Having a conversation with Mayor Harrington about the Magnolia Project. A stunned silence followed. You what? I'll explain when I see you, I promised. Are you and Aiden all right? Aiden's with Richard's mother for the afternoon. I've been going through Richard's home office, his files. Her voice broke slightly. There's so much I didn't know, so much he kept from me. We'll talk it through when I get home, I assured her. Just wait for me there. I found Jennifer in Thomas's study, surrounded by boxes of files she'd apparently brought from her house. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her red-rimmed eyes, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. I started looking through Richard's papers after I got home, she explained without preamble. At first, just to verify what Dad had collected, to see if there was any explanation, any justification. She gestured at the boxes. Instead, I found more, so much more. Records of payments to city officials, threatening letters to homeowners who refused to sell, environmental reports that were altered before submission to regulatory agencies. I settled into Thomas's desk chair, surveying the evidence of my son-in-law's systematic corruption spread across the floor of my husband's study. The irony wasn't lost on me. How deep does it go? I asked quietly. Jennifer laughed, a brittle sound without humor. How deep does the Atlantic Ocean go? This isn't just Richard. It's his partners. It's city officials. It's banks that provided financing, knowing the acquisition methods were questionable at best. She looked up at me, her expression haunted. I helped with some of this, Mom. Not knowingly, not understanding what it really meant, but I hosted dinner parties where Richard charmed planning commissioners. I organized charity events where he networked with investors. I was part of the machinery, even if I didn't see how it worked. You didn't know, I said gently. You can't blame yourself for that, can I? Should I have known? Would I have known if I'd been paying attention? If I'd asked questions instead of just accepting everything at face value? I had no answer for that. The line between willful ignorance and genuine deception is rarely clear, especially when love and trust are involved. Where is Richard now? I asked instead. I don't know. When I started finding these documents, I called him. The conversation didn't go well. He tried to explain it away at first. Standard business practices, aggressive but legal, necessary in a competitive market. When I didn't accept that, he got angry. Said I was being naive, that I'd been happy to enjoy the benefits of his success without questioning its source. Was he right? Jennifer was silent for a long moment. Partly, she finally admitted. I liked our life. The house in Ion, the country club membership, Aiden's private school. I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to disrupt the narrative we'd created. Successful power couple, perfect family, everything under control. And now I can't unsee what I've seen. She gestured at the documents surrounding her. These aren't just paper transactions. These are people's lives. Elderly homeowners pressured into selling properties their families had owned for generations. Communities disrupted. History erased for profit. I thought about my meeting with the mayor, the subtle threat I'd leveraged to force reconsideration of the Magnolia Project. So what will you do? Jennifer squared her shoulders, a determined expression replacing the despair of moments before. I'm going to make this right. Or at least try to. I've already spoken to an attorney, not one of Richard's, someone independent. I'm prepared to provide evidence, to testify if necessary. That could have serious consequences, I warned. For Richard, for his business partners. For your marriage. My marriage is already over, she said with quiet certainty. I made that decision the moment I understood what he tried to do to you, what he's been doing to this community. I can't be married to someone whose values are so fundamentally opposed to everything I was raised to believe in. And Aiden? Her expression softened at the mention of her son. He's 7. He loves his father, and Richard loves him. That won't change. We'll figure out co-parenting once the dust settles. She hesitated. I may need to stay here for a while if that's okay, until I sort things out. Of course, I said immediately. This is your home too. Always has been. Jennifer nodded gratefully. Then her expression shifted to curiosity. Now, what was this about meeting with the mayor? When did you become politically connected? I explained my conversation with Mayor Harrington, watching her eyes widen as I described leveraging Thomas's evidence to force reconsideration of the Magnolia Project. Mom, she said when I finished, a note of amazed respect in her voice. You basically threatened the mayor with a corruption scandal if he didn't change course on a major development project. I simply presented facts and suggested a more community-minded alternative, I corrected primly, though I couldn't help smiling at her characterization. The mayor is a practical man. He recognized the political risks of proceeding with a controversial project tainted by ethical concerns. Jennifer shook her head in disbelief. All these years, I thought of you as, I don't know, just Mom, English teacher, Dad's supportive wife, someone who needed protection from the harsh realities of business and politics. I thought of myself that way too, I admitted. It was easier in many ways, being the nurturer, the supporter, the steady presence in the background while others took center stage. But circumstances change. People change in response. Dad knew, Jennifer said quietly. He always saw you more clearly than anyone else, including yourself. That's why he left you the money, the evidence, the power to make choices when he couldn't protect you anymore. I nodded, throat tight with emotion. Thomas believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. The least I can do is prove him right. My phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. Boarding plane now. Back tonight. Any developments with Richard or the mayor? As I typed a response summarizing our progress, Jennifer began organizing the documents she'd brought, sorting them into categories: financial records, correspondence, legal agreements. Her methodical approach reminded me so much of Thomas that it made my heart ache. What happens now? She asked, looking up from her task. With the planning commission meeting on Monday? With Richard? With all of it? I thought about the chess game Thomas had set in motion months ago, the pieces now moving rapidly across the board. Now we prepare. We gather our evidence, solidify our strategy, build our alliances. The mayor may be reconsidering his position, but Richard won't surrender the Magnolia Project without a fight. We need to be ready. Jennifer nodded, her expression hardening with determination. Then let's get to work. As we bent over the documents together, mother and daughter united in purpose for the first time in too many years, I felt Thomas's presence in the room, not as a ghost or spiritual visitation, but as an undeniable force that had set these events in motion, creating the circumstances that would reveal our true characters when tested. His final gift hadn't been the money, I realized. It had been the opportunity to discover strengths I never knew I possessed, to reclaim relationships that had drifted, to stand firmly for principles that mattered, to become, finally and fully, the woman he had always seen in me. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, Charleston's October sunshine warming the brick pathways of my garden. I'd risen early, unable to sleep as my mind raced through preparations for tomorrow's crucial planning commission meeting. Jennifer was still asleep upstairs, exhausted from our late-night strategizing. Maggie had returned from Seattle late yesterday, announcing her intention to extend her leave of absence from the hospital to stay in Charleston until this whole situation is resolved. My daughters had rallied around me with a fierceness that both surprised and moved me. After years of growing apart, Jennifer absorbed in her privileged Charleston life, Maggie building her career across the country, they were united again, bound by shared purpose and rediscovered loyalty. I carried my coffee to the garden bench Thomas had built beneath the oak tree, settling into the dappled shade. From this spot, I could see most of our property: the vegetable garden where we'd grown tomatoes and peppers each summer, the rose bushes Thomas had planted for our 25th anniversary, the brick patio where we'd hosted faculty parties and family gatherings. This place held the narrative of our lives together. Not just in grand moments, but in daily rituals and seasonal rhythms. Sunday mornings reading on the porch, summer evenings watching fireflies, the corner of the yard where we'd buried beloved family pets, the maple tree we'd planted when Jennifer was born, now towering above the garden shed. My phone rang, interrupting my reverie. Andrew Willingham. "Good morning, Mrs. Monroe," he greeted me. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all. I've been up for hours. I thought you should know that there have been some interesting financial movements overnight. Richard Green has attempted to access several accounts connected to the Magnolia Project, only to find them temporarily frozen pending regulatory review." I sat up straighter. "That wasn't part of our strategy. Did you?" "Not my doing," Andrew assured me. "It appears someone with intimate knowledge of Brighton Development's financial structure has filed complaints with multiple regulatory agencies, triggering automatic holds on certain accounts." Jennifer. It had to be. She'd mentioned speaking with an independent attorney, but not filing formal complaints. She'd taken action on her own initiative, striking the first blow in what was rapidly becoming a multi-front battle. "That's unexpected," I said carefully, "but potentially helpful." "Indeed. Mr. Green will be quite occupied addressing these financial complications, which may limit his ability to prepare adequately for tomorrow's commission meeting." Andrew's tone remained professional, but I detected a note of satisfaction. "On a related note, I've taken the liberty of arranging a meeting for you this afternoon with Helen Blackwell." The name was familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. "And she is chair of the Charleston Historical Preservation Society, and, more relevantly, sister-in-law to Commissioner James Roberts, who holds the swing vote on zoning matters. Mrs. Blackwell has been a vocal opponent of the Magnolia Project from its inception, though largely ineffective due to limited access to concrete evidence of impropriety. I was beginning to appreciate Andrew's strategic thinking. Evidence we now have in abundance. "Precisely. The meeting is scheduled for 3 o'clock at her office on Church Street, if that's convenient." After confirming the appointment, I ended the call to find Maggie standing in the garden doorway, 2 coffee mugs in hand. "Plotting world domination before breakfast?" she asked, joining me on the bench and offering me a fresh cup. "I made a new pot. Yours has to be cold by now." I accepted gratefully. "Not world domination. Just a meeting with the Historical Preservation Society this afternoon." Maggie grinned. "Look at you building political alliances. Dad would be so proud." "I'm not sure proud is the right word," I mused. "Sometimes I wonder if this is really what Thomas intended when he set all this in motion." "What do you mean?" I gestured vaguely around us. "The confrontations, the legal maneuvering, pitting daughter against son-in-law. It's all becoming so adversarial." Maggie considered this, her expression thoughtful. "I think Dad was realistic about human nature. He knew Richard wouldn't simply walk away from a multi-million-dollar development because of moral appeals. He knew that protecting you and this house would require leverage. But Jennifer's marriage was built on shaky foundations long before any of this happened." Maggie interrupted gently. "Jen's been unhappy for years. She just wouldn't admit it to herself, let alone anyone else. This was news to me." "How do you know that?" Maggie's smile was sad. "She calls me sometimes, late at night, usually after she's had a couple of glasses of wine, talks about feeling trapped, about wondering if she made the right choices, about envying my freedom, if you can believe that." I could, actually. Jennifer's life had always appeared perfect from the outside. Successful husband, beautiful home, adorable child, enviable social position. But perfection maintained through constant vigilance and control is exhausting. A gilded cage is still a cage. "What about you?" I asked, turning to study my younger daughter more carefully. "Are you happy in Seattle with your career? Or are you also questioning your choices?" She shrugged, looking out across the garden rather than meeting my eyes. "I love my work. Being an ER nurse suits me. The pace, the urgency, the tangible difference you make in people's lives. But there are trade-offs. No relationship has survived my schedule. My apartment is basically a place to sleep between shifts. Sometimes I wonder if I'm hiding in my work, using the constant crisis environment to avoid creating a more balanced life." The honesty of her self-assessment touched me. Both my daughters were at crossroads, re-examining paths chosen years ago, just as I was. "Maybe that's what Thomas intended all along," I suggested. "Not just protecting the house or exposing Richard's business practices, but creating circumstances that would force all of us to reevaluate, to make conscious choices rather than simply continuing along established patterns. Maggie considered this, then nodded slowly. That sounds like Dad. He was always more interested in the process than the outcome, in how people arrived at decisions rather than the decisions themselves. The sound of the back door opening interrupted our conversation. Jennifer emerged, wrapped in a bathrobe, hair tousled from sleep. Despite her disheveled appearance, she looked more at peace than I'd seen her in years, as if shedding her perfect facade had allowed her to breathe freely for the first time. "Morning," she said, joining us on the patio. "What did I miss?" "Mom's meeting with the Historical Preservation Society this afternoon," Maggie informed her. "Building our coalition of allies before tomorrow's showdown." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "Good. I've been working on something too." She hesitated, then continued. "I filed complaints with the SEC and the State Banking Commission last night. Richard's business accounts should be frozen pending investigation. So Andrew's information had been correct. That's a significant escalation, I observed. Richard won't take it well." "No," Jennifer agreed, her expression hardening. "He won't, but it was necessary. Once I understood the full scope of what he's been doing, the shell companies, the pressure tactics, the payments to officials, I couldn't just sit on that knowledge. I had to act." "Are you prepared for his response?" Maggie asked, concern evident in her voice. "Richard isn't used to losing." Jennifer's smile was grim. "Neither am I. And unlike Richard, I don't have anything to hide. No shell companies, no bribes, no threatened homeowners." She turned to me. "Mr. Willingham called this morning before you were up. He's arranged for a security service to monitor the house just as a precaution. They'll be discreet, but they'll be watching." The idea that we might need security was sobering. This wasn't just a family disagreement or ethical debate anymore. It was a high-stakes confrontation with potential legal and financial consequences for powerful people. Richard stood to lose millions if the Magnolia Project collapsed. His business partners and political allies faced public embarrassment at minimum, possible criminal charges at worst. "We should review our strategy for tomorrow's meeting," I said, steering the conversation toward practical matters. "The mayor indicated he's open to reconsidering the Magnolia approval, but we can't count on his support. We need to present a compelling alternative that commissioners can embrace without appearing to capitulate entirely." Jennifer nodded. "I've been thinking about that. Richard's always framed this as a binary choice, either luxury development that revitalizes the neighborhood or stagnation that leaves it frozen in time. We need to present a third option that allows for growth while preserving community character." Thomas's alternative proposal, I remembered. The one I showed Mayor Harrington. Mixed-use development with affordable housing components and space for local businesses. "Exactly," Jennifer agreed. "But we need more than just a concept. We need financial projections showing it's viable, renderings that capture the vision, community support demonstrating political viability." "All by tomorrow afternoon?" Maggie asked skeptically. "Not from scratch," I clarified. "Thomas had the basic work done before he died. Andrew has the files. We just need to update and present it effectively." Jennifer stood, suddenly energized. "I'll call Andrew. Get the files sent over. I know people who can help with the financial projections and renderings, former colleagues who aren't tied to Richard's interests. And I'll start on community outreach," Maggie offered. "I'll contact the neighborhood association, local business owners, affordable housing advocates, get statements of support, maybe even some people to attend the meeting." I watched my daughters spring into action, their complementary skills creating a formidable team. Jennifer's business acumen and social connections, Maggie's empathy and ability to connect with people across socioeconomic lines, my own newfound political leverage and moral authority as the widow defending her home against predatory development. Thomas had seen this potential in us long before we recognized it ourselves. The day unfolded in a flurry of activity. By mid-afternoon, our dining room had transformed into a war room. Laptops open, papers spread across the table, phones constantly ringing with new allies joining our cause. Jennifer worked remotely with financial analysts, while Maggie coordinated with community groups. I prepared for my meeting with Helen Blackwell, selecting key documents that would demonstrate the Magnolia Project's threat to Charleston's historical character. The meeting itself proved more productive than I'd anticipated. Helen, a formidable septuagenarian with a steel-gray bob and piercing blue eyes, reviewed our evidence with methodical precision. "We've opposed this monstrosity from the beginning," she informed me, tapping manicured fingernails against the documents. But Richard Green and his partners have been remarkably effective at controlling the narrative. Economic development, job creation, urban renewal, pretty phrases masking ugly realities. "The commission meeting tomorrow is our opportunity to change that narrative," I suggested, "to present an alternative vision that honors Charleston's history while allowing for thoughtful growth." Helen studied me with newfound respect. "Thomas chose well," she said cryptically. "He approached me about 6 months before he died, you know. Wanted to discuss preservation strategies for threatened neighborhoods. I had no idea he was preparing for this specific battle. Another piece of Thomas's elaborate preparation that I hadn't known about. How many such conversations had he initiated? How many allies had he cultivated in anticipation of this moment? "Will your brother-in-law be receptive to our alternative proposal?" I asked, referring to Commissioner Roberts. Helen's smile was sphinx-like. "James values his position on the commission. He also values family harmony and his reputation in the preservation community. Present him with compelling evidence and a viable alternative, and he'll find the courage to vote appropriately." By the time I returned home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across Maple Street. A black sedan was parked discreetly across from our house. The security service Jennifer had mentioned, I presumed. The sight was both reassuring and unsettling, a reminder of the stakes involved. Inside, I found Jennifer and Maggie still working at the dining room table, now joined by 2 young professionals Jennifer had recruited to help with financial projections and architectural renderings. Empty takeout containers suggested they'd worked straight through dinner. "How was Helen?" Jennifer asked, looking up from her laptop. "Formidable, supportive, better connected than I realized." I set down my purse, surveying their progress. "How are things here?" "We've got the bones of a solid presentation," Jennifer replied. "Financial projections showing the alternative development can be profitable, though not as obscenely profitable as Richard's luxury concept. Preliminary renderings showing how historical structures can be preserved while adding new construction that complements rather than overwhelms the neighborhood character. And I've confirmed attendance from representatives of 6 community organizations," Maggie added, "plus statements of support from 3 more who can't send someone in person." I nodded approvingly. "You've accomplished more in 1 day than most people could in a week." "We're motivated," Jennifer said simply. "This isn't just about stopping Richard anymore. It's about creating something better for Charleston, for this neighborhood." Her words reminded me of conversations Thomas and I had shared over the years, discussions about community responsibility and ethical development that I'd supported but never led. Now those values were finding expression through concrete action, through the combined efforts of our family rallying to protect not just our home, but the homes of our neighbors. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Monroe? Richard Green requests a private meeting this evening to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to our current situation. His residence at 8 p.m. Come alone." I showed the message to my daughters, whose reactions were immediate and identical. "Absolutely not," Jennifer said firmly. "No way," Maggie echoed. "It's obviously a trap." "Not a trap," I disagreed. "A desperation move. Richard's accounts are frozen. His project is threatened. His political allies are distancing themselves. He wants to negotiate. Then he can meet you in a public place, with legal representation present," Jennifer insisted. "Not alone at his house after dark. Or he can wait until tomorrow's commission meeting like everyone else," Maggie added. They were right, of course. Meeting Richard privately would be foolish at this stage. Whatever he hoped to accomplish, intimidation, bribery, reconciliation, it would serve his interests, not ours. "I'll decline," I assured them. "But the fact that he's reaching out suggests our strategy is working. He's feeling the pressure." Jennifer nodded grimly. "Good. He should be worried. By this time tomorrow, if all goes according to plan, the Magnolia Project will be effectively dead, and Richard's business practices will be under investigation by at least 3 different agencies." As my daughters returned to their preparations, I stepped onto the front porch, breathing in the evening air scented with jasmine and distant salt water. Across the street, the security car remained, a tangible reminder of how quickly our family conflict had escalated into something larger and more consequential. I thought about Richard, alone in his mansion, watching his carefully constructed empire begin to crumble. I thought about Jennifer, choosing integrity over comfort, truth over illusion. I thought about Maggie, channeling her compassion into community advocacy, and I thought about Thomas, whose foresight had made all of this possible, not just the financial resources and evidence, but the values he'd instilled in our daughters, the example he'd set through his own quiet integrity. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, perhaps even a form of justice, but it had already brought something more valuable: clarity about who we were as individuals and as a family, about what we stood for and what we were willing to fight for. Whatever happened at the commission meeting, we would face it together, standing firmly on principles that mattered. The passive, accommodating widow that Richard had tried to manage no longer existed. In her place stood a woman with purpose, power, and unwavering resolve, surrounded by daughters who had found their own strength in this unexpected battle. Thomas would have been proud of all of us. The Charleston County Planning Commission meeting room was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, portraits of stern-faced historical figures gazing down from the walls. By 1:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the scheduled start, every seat was filled. Neighborhood residents in casual clothes sat alongside business people in suits, community activists next to curious observers. Our small contingent occupied the front row: myself, Jennifer, Maggie, Andrew Willingham, and Helen Blackwell. Jennifer had transformed back into her polished professional self, though without the rigid perfection I'd grown accustomed to seeing. Her navy suit was immaculate, but she'd left her hair in soft waves rather than her usual severe updo, had chosen sensible pumps rather than stilettos. Small changes that somehow made her appear more authentic, more present. "No sign of Richard yet," Maggie murmured, scanning the room. "Do you think he'll show?" "He'll be here," Jennifer replied with certainty. "He has too much at stake to surrender without a fight." She was right. At precisely 1:45, Richard strode in, flanked by his attorney and two men I recognized from Brighton Development's executive team. He looked polished, as always, in a bespoke suit, but tension radiated from his rigid posture, the tight set of his jaw. His gaze swept the room, landing briefly on our group before continuing to the commissioners filing in at the front. 7 commissioners took their places on the raised platform, Mayor Harrington among them, an unusual presence that signaled the significance of today's proceedings. The room quieted as Commission Chair Eleanor Dawson called the meeting to order, outlining the agenda with practiced efficiency. Our primary business today concerns a review of zoning approvals for the proposed Magnolia Development Project, she announced. Due to concerns raised regarding the application process, the Commission will reassess previous determinations and consider new information that has come to light. Richard leaned toward his attorney, their whispered conversation intense but inaudible. Jennifer's hand found mine, squeezing gently. "Before we begin formal proceedings," Chair Dawson continued, "Mayor Harrington has requested an opportunity to address the Commission." "Mr. Mayor?" The mayor approached the podium, his political mask firmly in place, grave yet authoritative, concerned yet controlled. "Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners, citizens of Charleston. I appreciate the opportunity to speak briefly before these important deliberations." His gaze swept the room, lingering momentarily on me before continuing. "The Magnolia Development Project has been presented to this commission, and to the broader community, as a significant economic opportunity for our city: job creation, tax revenue, urban renewal. These benefits are real and substantial." Richard straightened slightly, a flicker of hope crossing his features. "However," the mayor continued, "the manner in which a project is pursued matters as much as its outcome. The means, not merely the ends. It has come to my attention that certain aspects of the Magnolia Project's development may not align with the ethical standards our community expects and deserves." A murmur rippled through the audience. Richard's expression darkened. "Therefore, I am formally requesting that this commission suspend all approvals related to the Magnolia Project, pending a thorough review of both the application process and the project's impact on neighborhood preservation, affordable housing, and community character." The murmur became a buzz of surprised reactions. No one had expected the mayor to publicly distance himself from a project he'd previously championed. Richard stood abruptly, conferring urgently with his attorney. "Furthermore," Mayor Harrington concluded, I am establishing an independent panel to develop guidelines for responsible development in historical neighborhoods. Guidelines that balance economic growth with community preservation, that respect Charleston's unique character while embracing thoughtful evolution. Thank you. As he returned to his seat, Chair Dawson called the first scheduled speaker, Richard Green, representing Brighton Development Group. Richard approached the podium, outwardly composed despite the mayor's unexpected announcement. Always the consummate performer, he smiled confidently at the commissioners. Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished commissioners. I appreciate the opportunity to address concerns that have been raised about the Magnolia Project. Concerns I believe stem largely from misunderstandings about our development approach and vision for the neighborhood. He launched into a polished presentation, highlighting economic benefits, architectural details designed to complement Charleston's historical aesthetic, and community amenities included in the plan. His voice was smooth, his gestures measured, his arguments well-rehearsed. Change is inevitable, he concluded. The question is whether that change will be guided by professional developers with a stake in Charleston's future, or left to haphazard market forces. The Magnolia Project represents thoughtful, planned growth that honors our city's past while securing its economic future. Several commissioners nodded, apparently receptive to his framing. My heart sank slightly. Richard was skilled at this, at presenting self-interest as community benefit, at dressing profit-seeking in the language of progress. Thank you, Mr. Green, Chair Dawson said when he finished. The commission will now hear from Margaret Monroe, representing neighborhood residents. As I stood to take my place at the podium, Richard passed me in the aisle. His expression was cold, warning clear in his eyes. For a moment, I hesitated. This man was my son-in-law, my grandson's father. The personal cost of this confrontation suddenly felt very real. Then I remembered his calculated attempt to manipulate me out of my home, his willingness to use his own wife against her mother, his systematic pressure on elderly homeowners throughout the neighborhood. I straightened my shoulders and continued to the podium. Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners, I began. My name is Margaret Monroe. I've lived at 427 Maple Street for 40 years. I raised my daughters there. I taught English at Charleston High for 3 decades. I know this neighborhood not as a development opportunity, but as a living community with deep roots and complex connections. I detailed the Magnolia Project's true impacts: displacement of long-term residents, destruction of historical structures, transformation of a diverse residential neighborhood into an exclusive commercial district. I presented Thomas's alternative development concept, highlighting how it balanced growth with preservation, profit with community benefit. The choice before this commission isn't between progress and stagnation, I concluded. It's between development that extracts value from our community for the benefit of a few investors, and development that creates value for the entire neighborhood while respecting its essential character. Between predatory acquisition tactics that pressure vulnerable homeowners, and ethical business practices that engage residents as partners in community evolution. When I returned to my seat, Richard was staring at me with barely contained fury. Jennifer leaned close to whisper, "Well done, Mom. Really well done." The next hour brought a parade of speakers, community advocates, architectural historians, affordable housing experts, local business owners, most supporting our alternative vision, a few defending Richard's original plan. Commission members listened attentively, asking occasional questions that revealed their growing skepticism about the Magnolia Project as originally conceived. Commissioner Roberts, Helen Blackwell's brother-in-law, proved particularly pointed in his questioning of Richard's team regarding acquisition methods and community displacement impacts. According to property records, he noted during one exchange, Brighton Development used 5 different LLC entities to acquire properties within the Magnolia footprint. Why was this complex corporate structure necessary if, as you claim, all acquisitions were transparent and ethical? Richard's attorney attempted to explain it as standard industry practice, but the damage was done. The commissioner's question had highlighted exactly the secretive, potentially manipulative tactics we'd been challenging. As the meeting progressed, Richard grew increasingly agitated, his carefully maintained facade beginning to crack. When Jennifer was called to testify about documents she'd discovered in his office files, he shot to his feet. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "My wife has no authority to present confidential business records obtained without permission. Those documents are privileged and inadmissible in these proceedings." Chair Dawson regarded him coolly. Mr. Green, this is not a court of law. The Commission has broad discretion regarding what information it considers in zoning deliberations. Mrs. Green may continue. Jennifer approached the podium with a quiet dignity I'd rarely seen in her. Gone was the polished corporate wife, the perfect hostess, the deferential partner. In her place stood a woman fully inhabiting her own authority. The documents I'm presenting were found in my home, she stated clearly. As Mr. Green's wife and a corporate officer in several of his business entities, I had legitimate access to these records. More importantly, they demonstrate a pattern of deliberate deception regarding the Magnolia Project, deception that directly impacts this commission's decision-making capacity. She proceeded to outline, with devastating precision, how Richard's companies had systematically targeted vulnerable homeowners, manipulated property values through strategic rumors, and misrepresented environmental impacts in regulatory filings. As someone who benefited from these business practices without fully understanding them, I accept my share of responsibility, she concluded, her voice steady, despite the emotion visible on her face. But I cannot remain silent knowing what I now know. This commission has an opportunity today to reject development practices that harm our community and embrace an alternative vision that serves all Charleston residents, not just the wealthy few. When she returned to her seat beside me, I squeezed her hand, immensely proud of her courage. Richard's rebuttal was immediate and furious. My wife is clearly acting under duress, manipulated by her family during a difficult personal time. These allegations are baseless. The desperate attempts of a woman who recently discovered her father's secret fortune and is now using it to wage some kind of personal vendetta against me. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Thomas's hidden wealth hadn't been public knowledge until this moment. Mr. Green, Commissioner Roberts interjected, are you suggesting that Mrs. Monroe's opposition to your development is financially motivated? Because the documents before us suggest your own financial interests in this matter are quite substantial. Richard faltered momentarily. I'm simply pointing out that what appears to be a community dispute is actually a family conflict being inappropriately aired in a public forum. On the contrary, I said, rising from my seat though I hadn't been called. This is very much a community issue. The tactics used against me, pressure to sell based on false financial information, misleading claims about property values, attempts to isolate me from support systems, were used against dozens of homeowners throughout this neighborhood. The difference is that my late husband anticipated these methods and took steps to protect me. Most residents weren't so fortunate. Chair Dawson gavelled for order as murmurs swept the room. We will take a 15-minute recess, she announced. When we return, the Commission will deliberate and vote on the Mayor's request to suspend Magnolia Project approvals pending further review. As commissioners filed out, Richard strode directly to our group, his attorney hurrying to keep pace. You've made a serious mistake, he said, voice low but vibrating with anger. All of you. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Jennifer met his gaze unflinchingly. You're right about one thing, Richard. It isn't over. The financial investigations are just beginning. The regulatory reviews, the legal proceedings. You built your business on quicksand, and now you're surprised it's collapsing. You'll regret this, he warned, glancing between her and me. When the dust settles, when you realize what you've thrown away based on some misguided family loyalty. It's not about loyalty, Jennifer interrupted. It's about integrity, something I lost sight of for too long. She gestured toward the commission chamber. Everything in there, the documents, the testimony, it's all true. You know it. I know it. The difference is, I can no longer pretend it doesn't matter. For a fleeting moment, something like genuine pain crossed Richard's face. Not the frustration of thwarted ambition, but the deeper wound of personal rejection. Then his expression hardened again. We'll discuss this at home, he said flatly, away from your mother's influence. No, Richard, we won't. Jennifer removed her wedding ring, placing it deliberately in his palm. I'm staying with my mother until I find a place of my own. My attorney will contact you regarding divorce proceedings and custody arrangements for Aiden. He stared at the ring in his hand, momentarily speechless. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his attorney scrambling after him. Are you okay? I asked Jennifer, watching her ex-husband's retreating figure. She exhaled slowly. No, but I will be. For the first time in a very long time, I'm making choices based on what I know is right, not what seems easiest or most advantageous. It hurts, but it also feels clarifying. When the commission reconvened 15 minutes later, the chamber had filled even further, word having spread about the dramatic confrontation unfolding. Richard and his team returned, their expressions grim, but determined. Chair Dawson called for commission deliberation. One by one, members shared their perspectives, most expressing concern about the acquisition tactics revealed today, the potential community displacement, the apparent misrepresentations in application materials. Commissioner Roberts spoke last, his measured tone carrying particular weight as the known swing vote. Development is inevitable and necessary for a thriving city, he acknowledged. But how we develop matters. Who benefits matters. What we preserve matters. The evidence presented today suggests the Magnolia Project as currently configured fails to meet the ethical and community-focused standards this commission should demand. The vote, when it came, was decisive. 6-1 in favor of suspending all Magnolia Project approvals pending comprehensive review. Furthermore, the commission unanimously approved the creation of a citizen advisory board to help shape revised guidelines for development in historical neighborhoods, a board I would later be invited to join. As the meeting adjourned, reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, questions overlapping. Mayor Harrington made a brief statement about ensuring development serves the entire community, skillfully avoiding direct criticism of Richard while clearly distancing himself from the Magnolia Project. In the midst of the commotion, Maggie appeared at my elbow. "We should go," she murmured. "Richard looks like he might explode, and there's nothing more to accomplish here." She was right. We'd achieved our immediate goal, stopping the Magnolia Project in its current form, creating space for an alternative vision to take shape. The longer battles, Jennifer's divorce, the various investigations into Richard's business practices, the development of truly community-centered guidelines, those lay ahead, but they would unfold in their own time, through proper channels. As we gathered our belongings, Helen Blackwell approached, her expression satisfied but composed. "Well done, Margaret. Thomas would be proud." This was his victory as much as ours, I acknowledged. He set everything in motion. Helen shook her head slightly. "He provided tools, certainly, but you wielded them with remarkable effectiveness. Don't diminish your own role in today's outcome." Outside the county building, autumn sunshine warmed the steps where reporters had gathered, hoping for additional comments. We skirted the crowd, making our way toward the parking lot where Andrew had arranged for a car to meet us. "Mrs. Monroe," the voice was familiar. Richard's executive assistant, a young woman named Tara, who had always been polite but distant during family gatherings. She hurried toward us, clutching a manila envelope. "Mrs. Monroe," she repeated, slightly breathless. "I wanted to catch you before you left. There's something you should see." She handed me the envelope. "It's from Mr. Green's private files, something I found while gathering documents for today's meeting. I made a copy because it didn't seem right that he had this, and you didn't." Before I could respond, she turned and hurried away, disappearing back into the building. "What is it?" Maggie asked, eyeing the envelope curiously. "I don't know," I replied, "but I think it can wait until we're home." The drive back to Maple Street passed in thoughtful silence, each of us processing the events of the afternoon. Jennifer stared out the window, fingers absently tracing where her wedding ring had been. Maggie checked her phone periodically, updating supportive friends in Seattle about the outcome. I held the mysterious envelope in my lap, wondering what final revelation it might contain. Back home, we gathered in Thomas's study, the heart of the house where so much had been revealed over the past tumultuous days. I opened the envelope carefully, removing several sheets of paper, Thomas's distinctive handwriting immediately recognizable. "It's a letter," I said softly, "to Richard, dated 3 weeks before Thomas died." I began to read aloud. "Richard, by the time you receive this, I will be gone. Margaret will have learned about the financial arrangements I've made for her future security. The stage will be set for whatever course you choose to pursue regarding the Magnolia development and my family's home. I want you to understand that what happens next is entirely your choice. This letter, along with detailed evidence of your business practices that I've spent years documenting, has been placed in your office safe as a courtesy and a warning. You alone will decide whether it remains private or becomes public. If you choose to proceed ethically, to respect Margaret's right to determine her own future, to revise your development plans to serve the broader community, to build success through integrity rather than exploitation, then this letter and the accompanying documents will remain exactly where they are now. Your reputation and business can evolve towards something more sustainable, more honorable. If, however, you attempt to manipulate my wife out of her home, to use my daughter against her mother, to continue the predatory practices that have characterized the Magnolia Project thus far, then mechanisms I've put in place will ensure appropriate consequences. This is not a threat, Richard. It's an opportunity, perhaps the most important one you'll ever receive. A chance to examine the man you've become and choose a different path forward. I hope, for Jennifer's sake, for Aidan's, and yes, even for yours, that you make the wiser choice. Either way, know this. Margaret is stronger than you imagine, more resourceful than she herself realizes. Do not mistake her kindness for weakness. Do not underestimate her resolve when protecting what matters. The choice, as always, is yours. Thomas Monroe. The study fell silent as I finished reading, the weight of Thomas's final message to Richard hanging in the air between us. He gave Richard a chance, Jennifer said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. A clear warning and a way out, which Richard ignored, Maggie added. He saw the letter, knew the consequences, and still tried to take your house. I refolded the letter carefully, returning it to its envelope. I think Richard couldn't imagine any outcome other than his own success. He saw the letter as an empty threat from a dying man, not as the genuine opportunity Thomas intended it to be. What will you do with it? Jennifer asked. I considered the question, weighing options and implications. Nothing, for now. It served its purpose. Whatever happens next with Richard, with the Magnolia Project, with the investigations, it should unfold based on facts and evidence, not personal vendettas or posthumous revelations. Maggie nodded approvingly. Always the English teacher, finding the moral of the story, the lesson in the conflict. Some habits die hard, I acknowledged with a small smile. Outside, twilight was settling over Charleston, the ancient oaks along Maple Street casting long shadows across lawns and gardens. In homes throughout the neighborhood, families were gathering for dinner, unaware that today's commission decision had fundamentally altered their community's future. The Magnolia Project, as originally conceived, was effectively dead. What would replace it remained to be seen, but the conversation had shifted, from profit maximization to community preservation, from exclusivity to inclusivity, from exploitation to collaboration. Thomas had set the stage for this transformation, but we, his family, his community, had brought it to fruition. Together, we had discovered strengths we hadn't known we possessed, connections we'd forgotten existed, principles that mattered more than comfort or convenience. As darkness fell outside the study windows, I felt Thomas's presence not as a ghost, but as a continuing influence, in the home we'd built together, in the daughters we'd raised, in the values that had guided my actions when tested, the invisible threads connecting past to present, choices to consequences, individual lives to collective futures. The inheritance he'd left wasn't just money or evidence or strategic advantage. It was the opportunity to become fully myself, to step out of supporting roles into the center of my own story, to discover that the quiet English teacher, the supportive wife, the nurturing mother had always contained within her the capacity for fierce advocacy, strategic thinking, and moral courage. That was Thomas's true legacy, and I intended to honor it. 1 year later, I stood on my front porch, watching autumn leaves dance across the lawn in the October breeze. The maple tree that gave our street its name had turned brilliant crimson, its reflection shimmering in the windows of the newly restored Victorian across the way. So much had changed in 12 months, yet the essential character of our neighborhood remained, perhaps even strengthened by the battles we'd fought and won. The Magnolia Project had been officially abandoned 3 months after the commission hearing. Brighton Development Group, facing multiple investigations and the loss of political support, had sold its assembled properties to a community land trust, an outcome no one could have predicted when our confrontation began. Richard, facing potential criminal charges related to financial irregularities, had negotiated a settlement that required financial restitution, but avoided prison time. He'd left Charleston shortly afterward, relocating to Atlanta to rebuild his career and reputation. Jennifer had finalized her divorce 6 months ago, establishing a co-parenting arrangement that allowed Aiden regular time with both parents. She'd surprised everyone, perhaps herself most of all, by declining lucrative job offers from development firms to instead launch a consulting practice focused on ethical urban planning and community-centered design. Her first major client, the Citizen Advisory Board tasked with creating new guidelines for historical neighborhood development. "Mom, the caterers are here," Maggie called from inside, interrupting my reflections. "Should I show them to the backyard?" "Yes, please," I replied, checking my watch. Guests would begin arriving in 2 hours for the Neighborhood Association's annual autumn gathering, an event I was hosting for the first time. Maggie had extended her leave of absence from the Seattle hospital into a permanent relocation to Charleston, accepting a position at the County Medical Center's emergency department. She'd rented a small apartment downtown initially, but spent so much time at the house on Maple Street that we'd recently discussed her moving back home, not from financial necessity, but from genuine preference for each other's company. Inside, the house hummed with preparation activity. The dining room table, cleared of the strategic documents and legal papers that had covered it a year ago, now held floral arrangements and serving platters. Family photos lined the hallway, including new additions: Jennifer and Aiden kayaking on the Cooper River, Maggie in her new hospital ID badge, me accepting an appointment to the Historical Preservation Society board, and, in the center, a photo of Thomas that I'd moved from his study, not the formal portrait from his college faculty page, but a candid shot taken on this very porch years ago. He sat in the wicker chair, reading glasses perched on his nose, looking up from a book with that particular expression of amused intelligence that had been uniquely his. It was how I preferred to remember him, present, engaged, quietly observing the world with both compassion and clarity. The doorbell rang. Too early for party guests. I opened the front door to find Andrew Willingham on the porch, elegant as always in a tailored suit, leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "Mrs. Monroe," he greeted me warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting your preparations." "Not at all," I assured him, ushering him into the living room. "Though I am surprised to see you today. I thought our business was concluded last week. We'd finalized the establishment of the Monroe Family Foundation the previous Tuesday, a charitable entity funded by a significant portion of Thomas's inheritance, focused on affordable housing initiatives and educational opportunities for Charleston's underserved communities. Another way of transforming Thomas's secret fortune into visible community benefit. Almost concluded, Andrew corrected, opening his portfolio. "There's one final document Thomas wanted you to have, precisely 1 year after the resolution of the Magnolia situation. He was very specific about the timing." He handed me a sealed envelope, my name written in Thomas's distinctive hand. Even now, months after the initial revelations, my husband continued to surprise me with his foresight, his careful planning, his attention to meaningful timing. "Would you like privacy?" Andrew offered. I shook my head. "No need. Please sit. Can I offer you tea? Coffee?" "Tea would be lovely, thank you." In the kitchen, I found Maggie directing the catering staff with good-natured efficiency. "Andrew's here," I explained, preparing a tea tray. "With one final message from your father, apparently." She raised her eyebrows. "Dad's posthumous communication system continues to impress. Need company for the big reveal?" "I think this one's just for me," I replied, "but I'll share if it seems appropriate." Back in the living room, I served tea in the Wedgwood cups Thomas had always preferred, then settled into my chair with the envelope. Unlike previous revelations, I felt no trepidation opening this one, only curiosity and a gentle melancholy, the bittersweet awareness that this might be Thomas's final message from beyond. Inside was a single sheet of his personal stationery, dated 6 weeks before his death. "My dearest Peggy, if you're reading this, a year has passed since the Magnolia confrontation reached its conclusion. I've asked Andrew to deliver this letter only if certain conditions were met, namely, that you successfully protected our home, stood firm against pressure, and emerged from the experience with your independence and dignity intact. That you've received this confirms you did exactly that, though I never doubted you would. There's a particular kind of clarity that comes with terminal illness. As my body weakened, my perception of what truly matters grew sharper. I realized that despite our 4 decades together, Despite raising our daughters and building our home and sharing thousands of ordinary days, there was one thing I'd never fully given you: the opportunity to discover your own strength independent of my presence or protection. It wasn't deliberate withholding, more a function of the roles we naturally assumed. Me, the absent-minded professor with big ideas; you, the practical, nurturing center that held our family together. We were a good team, a balanced partnership. But partnerships can sometimes mask capabilities that might flourish if tested individually. So yes, I arranged financial security for you. Yes, I gathered evidence against Richard's schemes. Yes, I created contingencies and fail-safes and strategic advantages. But I did these things not to fight your battles for you, but to ensure you'd have the resources to fight them yourself. To create circumstances where your intelligence, your integrity, your fundamental strength would have the opportunity to emerge fully. The money was never the point, Peggy. It was always about creating the conditions for you to become everything I already knew you were. A formidable woman whose kindness had been mistaken for weakness, whose supportiveness had been interpreted as dependency. I wish I could have witnessed your transformation firsthand. I wish we could have entered this new chapter together, partners in a different configuration than before. Since that wasn't possible, I hope you'll accept this final gift instead: my profound admiration for the woman you've always been, and the woman you've become. Whatever you choose to do with the years ahead, however you decide to use the resources now at your disposal, know that my greatest achievement wasn't financial success, or academic recognition, or even raising our daughters. It was recognizing, from that first faculty mixer 4 decades ago, the extraordinary person you were beneath the quiet exterior, the woman who would become my greatest love, my moral compass, and ultimately, my proudest legacy. All my love, always, Thomas. I folded the letter carefully, aware of tears sliding down my cheeks, but making no move to wipe them away. After all the revelations of the past year, the hidden fortune, the elaborate contingency plans, the strategic maneuvers orchestrated from beyond the grave, this final message was the most profound. Not because it revealed anything new, but because it confirmed what I'd gradually come to understand. Thomas's elaborate arrangements hadn't been about controlling events after his death, but about creating space for me to grow into myself once he was gone. "Are you all right?" Andrew asked gently, his tea untouched. "Yes," I replied, surprised to find it absolutely true. "Better than all right, actually." Before I could elaborate, the front door opened and Jennifer entered, Aiden racing ahead of her into the house. "Grandma," he called, spotting me in the living room. "We brought extra pumpkins for the party. Really big ones." At 7, Aiden had inherited his mother's determination and his grandfather's curiosity, a powerful combination that kept both Jennifer and me constantly on our toes. The divorce had been difficult for him initially, but children are remarkably resilient when surrounded by love and honesty. He'd adapted to the new arrangement with increasing confidence, especially once the tension between his parents had dissipated into a workable, if distant, co-parenting relationship. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I replied. "Why don't you help Aunt Maggie in the kitchen? I think she's arranging cookies for the party." He needed no further encouragement, racing off toward the promise of sweets. Jennifer smiled apologetically. "Sorry to interrupt. The party prep is under control, I promise. We're actually ahead of schedule." "Not an interruption at all," I assured her. "Andrew was just delivering a final letter from your father, a sort of closure to everything that's happened this past year." Jennifer nodded, understanding without needing details. "Dad always did appreciate narrative structure. A proper ending would be important to him." Andrew rose, gathering his portfolio. "I should be going. Mrs. Monroe, it's been an honor to assist with Thomas's arrangements. He spoke of you with such admiration. It's been a privilege to see firsthand how justified that admiration was." After he'd gone, Jennifer joined me on the sofa, glancing curiously at the letter still in my hand. "Anything you want to share?" I considered the question, then passed her the letter. "It's personal, but not private, if that makes sense. Your father had remarkable insight, even at the end." She read silently, her expression softening as she absorbed Thomas's final message. "He was right," she said finally, returning the letter. "About you. About what you've become this past year. What we've all become," I corrected gently. "You've made changes at least as significant as mine." She smiled, acknowledging the truth in this. "It's strange. A year ago I thought I had everything figured out. The perfect marriage, The ideal life, all the right choices. Now I'm a single mother starting a new business, living in a modest townhouse instead of a mansion, and I've never felt more authentic, more aligned with my actual values instead of values I thought I should have. That's no small achievement, I observed. Many people go their entire lives without that kind of alignment. From the kitchen came the sound of Aiden's laughter, followed by Maggie's theatrical groan, some cooking misadventure unfolding, no doubt. Jennifer and I exchanged smiles, the simple joy of family dynamics momentarily overshadowing weightier reflections. I should rescue Maggie before Aiden convinces her to let him frost all the cookies, Jennifer said, rising. Want to supervise, or do you need a few minutes with Dad's letter? I'll be right there, I promised. Just need a moment to collect my thoughts before the party chaos begins. Alone in the living room, I read Thomas's letter once more, each word resonating with deeper meaning now. His final gift hadn't been money or strategic advantage, but something far more valuable. The opportunity to discover who I was without him, to build a life defined by my own choices rather than external expectations. The past year had transformed our family in ways I couldn't have imagined when Thomas died. Jennifer had abandoned the artificial perfection of her previous life for something messier, but more genuine. Maggie had returned to Charleston, reconnecting with her roots while maintaining the independence she'd always valued. I had emerged from the supporting role I'd occupied for decades, discovering capacities for leadership, strategic thinking, and moral courage that had always existed beneath the surface. And our community had changed too. The Citizen Advisory Board was creating development guidelines that balanced growth with preservation, profit with social responsibility. The Neighborhood Association had evolved from a social organization into a powerful advocacy group. The Monroe Family Foundation was funding initiatives that would benefit Charleston's most vulnerable residents for generations to come. None of this would have happened without the crisis precipitated by Richard's attempt to acquire our home, without Thomas's careful planning to ensure I'd have resources to resist, without the discovery of strengths we hadn't known we possessed, until circumstances demanded their emergence. Outside, the afternoon light was taking on the golden quality particular to October in Charleston, warm, rich, tinged with the awareness of impending change as summer finally surrendered to autumn. Soon our garden would fill with neighbors gathering to celebrate the season, to strengthen community bonds, to share food and conversation in the shadow of the home Thomas and I had lovingly restored over decades. I tucked his letter into my pocket, a tangible connection to the man who had seen in me capabilities I hadn't recognized in myself, who had arranged, with his final act of love, for me to discover them on my own terms, in my own time. The inheritance he'd left wasn't measured in dollars or property or even influence. It was the gift of self-discovery, of becoming, fully and without apology, the woman I was always meant to be, standing in the house that held the memories of our life together, surrounded by the family we'd created, supported by the community we'd helped nurture. I felt Thomas's presence not as absence or loss, but as foundation and inspiration. Not an ending, but a continuation. The next chapter in a story still unfolding, still rich with possibility, still mine to write.